Hello friends and welcome back to Haas of Props. Continuing with the Star Wars lightsaber builds, this week I'm going to be making Luke Skywalker's from the Return of the Jedi. We got to see this not only in the Return of the Jedi, but in the Mandalorian series, the Book of Boba Fett, and the Kenobi series on Disney+. When doing the research trying to find high-res images of this, I found that there's a wide variation in models of this version of the lightsaber, particularly around the control area. Some of them have switches, some of them have like bumps instead of lines. So there was a lot of like, okay, what features do I want to incorporate in this thing? But taking into account all those different features, I decided to stick with the original from the Return of the Jedi. So let's get started. I designed the pieces for Luke's the same way as with Obi-Wan's. No internal supports, everything is built into the design. The only difference is Luke's is only made with 6 individual pieces. Before assembling, I prepared the pieces just like I did in my other video. I built both lightsabers at the same time, so the processes will be very similar. The first step is they get an initial sanding with a 120 grit pad on my hand sander. Then I switch to some 240 grit paper and sand the pieces by hand. These initial sandings are meant to remove the majority of the print layer textures, aka print lines. Now would be a great time, and I would really appreciate it if you would click the subscribe button, if you haven't already. It's free to you and it will help this channel grow, and if you click the notification bell you can get notified when a new project is released. Thank you. With everything sanded, assembly can now happen. I begin with the hand grip area and the controls. These pieces are attached to each other with CA glue or any super glue. I apply the glue to not only the pegs but also the rear of the controls in order to make sure there's sufficient adhesion. Then a few drops of zip kicker squeezed onto the wet glue will cause it to cure in seconds and assembly can continue. Next, I squeeze some E6000 onto the peg and top surface like so. E6000 will give a more flexible bond and is less likely to crack like super glue will. It does take longer to dry, so I do use some CA glue in a few spots so I can continue to build and not worry about having to wait. With the glues in place, I slid the main hilt onto the peg and set the CA glue spots with zip kicker. Then the focusing ring can be attached the same way. And then the blade emitter. And the clip ring can be snapped into the pommel's designated holes, but for now I'm going to hold on putting it in until after these next few steps. I'm going to take some of this glazing and spot putty and use it to clean up print lines and spots like the bottom of the pommel where the pieces were touching the print bed or where supports were used for overhangs. To apply, I simply use a palette knife and thickly smear it onto these spots while making sure to really press it into the lines. Then I let the hilt sit overnight. This is mainly to allow the glues time to completely cure, and once everything is cured the next day, I thin some of the spot putty with some acetone so it's about the consistency of a thin, cheap acrylic paint. This can then be brushed onto the rest of the lightsaber with an old paintbrush. This helps fill in any areas where some of the print lines are still visible. If you have an old airbrush, you could thin the putty a little more and spray it onto the saber. I will usually do that when an object has very fine details, but for something like this, a brush will work just fine. When everything is dry, the surface can be sanded to remove any brush marks or spots where the putty is uneven or may have run. I begin with some 240 grit sandpaper, making sure to get in all the small nooks and crannies. Once finished with the 240, I repeat the same process with some 400. You can see how the hilt is already looking really smooth, but to get a metal finish in the end, we're going to take it even farther. To do this, I use a 2-in-1 filler and sandable primer, and I'll apply 2 to 3 light coats to build up coverage and make sure it's even. When the primer is dry, I sand the surface with the 400 grit. Again, this is just to remove any unevenness in the primer layer. You want to use a high grit like this for this step, so it smooths and doesn't remove large amounts of the primer like it would with a lower grit. With all the powder wiped away, we can polish up the surface. To do that, use some 1000 grit and take a brush with some water and brush this onto the hilt. Then using the sandpaper, sand the wet area with a circular motion. You can see how this is already creating a super smooth, shiny surface. And when it's finished, see how the entire hilt is so smooth and you can't notice any of the original print lines. At this point, the entire piece can be sprayed with some glossy black spray paint. The gloss will make the metallics pop later on, and since it's just a base layer, I'm using this cheap stuff. And since it's cheap, I spray about 3 to 4 very thin layers in order to avoid drips. When the black's dry, I tape off the main hilt with plastic and masking tape. The black acts as a base, so we can spray the rest with some metallic silver. You wouldn't think so, but having the glossy black under the silver really causes the silver to shine. If we had used a flat or a satin finish, you could see how it affects the brilliance of the silver, making it look a little dull. Alright, now we're down to just some brushwork. The top edges of the main hilt ridges need to go silver, and to do that I'm using a flat edge brush and some mirror chrome paint from Spastic. This paint is typically used in airbrushing, but I found it works really well this way when working on small areas. It's acetone based, so it'll dry quickly and I don't have to worry about getting my hands in wet paint. Then some glossy black acrylic can be used in the triangle recessed areas on the controls, as well as the rectangles on the surface and the buttons below the triangles. Next, I painted the focusing ring and the post below the blade emitter with some light metallic bronze. Usually I apply anywhere from 2 to 4 coats to make sure it is evenly coated. The reason for it needing this many coats is because it is so smooth, the paint doesn't have any surface to grab onto. It just moves around. But thin coats will win in the end. Oh, and I forgot. I used some of the glossy black acrylic on the blade emitter tip and the screw detail. And with that, the lightsaber is finished. Luke's saber is a lot easier to assemble and paint than Obi-Wan's was, but it's just as, if not more, iconic. And when I was building it, it was interesting to see the similarities between the master and the students I never really noticed before. So comparing the two lightsabers side by side, it's interesting to see the overlaps in the design that I never even noticed before while watching the movies. So we have the masters, and then it's interesting that Luke modeled his lightsaber after his master's, but with obviously some modifications to it. So let me know what your thoughts are on these builds or on lightsabers in general. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments below. And if you'd like to make these for yourself, you can find links to the kits in the below description. I hope you enjoyed these builds. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with friends, family, anyone else you can think of. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and I'll catch you on the next one. And remember, if you are building any of my builds or using any of my templates, feel free and tag me at Haas of Props on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, because I would really like to see your fantastic work. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.